I got you down for one mark.
There'll be more.
And it's on Facebook Live, correct? Once we start?
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay.
And commissioners, make sure that you are not muted for a roll call, please. Thank you.
We are live and ready to go. Thank you.
Take two. Welcome this morning to the subcommittee meeting, Thursday, June the 11th. Need a roll call, please.
Commissioner Simmons,
Present.
Commissioner Wynn-Miller,
Present.
Commissioner Brown,
There.
Commissioner Galladay,
Here.
Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Costello,
Present.
Commissioner Gully, Commissioner Beach,
Here.
Commissioner Zimmerman, Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Is that everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Myra, was there any speaker cards submitted?
Yes, commissioners, we received 2 comment cards for today's meeting. I will defer to Barb Inneking for more information regarding those comments.
We received two comment cards, and I'm going to read them both. The first one is from Liz Kramer, a city resident, and her topic is the new ride and abide policy review. And her comments are, I'm concerned about the details of the proposed ride and abide policy and the vetting by policy experts who look for the impact on our most vulnerable populations. What protections are there to ensure that repeat offenders or those who are experiencing homelessness are not criminalized and punished? Will review committee members for appeals be specifically trained to address racial and socioeconomic equity? In general, I think the idea of being able to ban those who are causing the most problems makes sense, but I want to make sure that those with expertise to assess the impact on vulnerable individuals have reviewed thoroughly before it is adopted. So that's the comment from Liz Kramer. The second comment card is from Mitch Eagles, and he's representing transit riders, and he has several comments. So if you would just bear with me as I go through these from Mr. Eagles. I think it's ridiculous that we never stop fare enforcement on Metro, and that Metro fare enforcements are still regularly not wearing masks. Bi-State received a $142 million grant. That's almost half your operating budget on Metro for a year, and yet we're still requiring fares and doing fare enforcement. And the system we've implemented seems half thought through. Riders buy a cash fare, get no transfer, so now they must touch a fare machine at the Metrolink station if they are transferring. This just adds additional vectors. Given the demographics of our system, this has a disproportionate impact on Black St. Louisans, and I would guess that that's even more true during a pandemic where only the most reliant on public transit are riding. If Bi-State believes that Black Lives Matter, then I think they really need to do a better job of showing. I would ask the board to confirm their commitment to racial equity rather than hand waving. I also hope that Bi-State commissioners are listening to the national conversation about the role of police. I think any rider on our system has seen the racial bias of our public safety officers. I have regularly seen Black riders asked to show their pass in a more discerning way than I, a white rider, am. Mr. Roach's response to my email about the coronavirus concerns was sorely disappointing, placing the perception of safety above the actual creation of safety, which would include reducing vectors of transmission for a deadly disease, is a succinct example of Bi-State's wrong-headed approach. I have concerns about a policy allowing users to be banned from the system. While I appreciate that the policy only applies to serious issues, I have doubts trusting this in your hands when you have been proven reticent to provide the public with the ability to actually oversee problems. A few months ago, I brought a chart to this board which suggested a serious increase in fare violations issued to our riders, which I made utilizing Metro's public safety data. Since then, the data I used to make that chart has disappeared from Metro's website. I have received a response that this data will never be available to the public again. This is frankly bonkers. I miss my ability to attend these meetings in person. I hope you will forgive this letter sounding terse, but serious issues and Bi-State continues to act like a clown. I'm sad to see Commissioner Holman go, as she always seemed to be the most willing to actually work towards serving transit riders. I welcome the newest commissioner, although I would really have liked to have seen a transit-reliant person on the board and not one who lives in the central corridor and primarily uses Metrolink. That is not representative of our ridership. Looking forward to being on the bus with regularity once this pandemic is over. And those are the comments from Mr. Eagles. And that's all the comments cards we have for
Very
today.
good. Very good. Thank you. I need an approval of the minutes of May 14th, 2020.
Before we go there, Herb, I just want to say that I'm having a little bit of difficulty. I don't know if it's just my connection, but I was having trouble hearing Barb Enikin's comments. They were going in and out. Was it just me, or is it?
No, same here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we all check? Can you check your connection then? Whoever is speaking from Metro, because you're going in and out.
Right.
Barb, can you say something again?
Okay. And so did you have, you had trouble hearing me on those comments?
Yeah, you faded in and out, but
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now clearly?
I can.
Okay, good. Okay.
Barb, would it be possible to send those comments out to the commissioners?
Yes, we
Very
can
good.
do
Is that
that.
okay
And
with
they'll be part of the permanent record as well.
Very good. Okay, we'll try it and make sure, and when she talks, if we hear anything else or if any of the other people over there had that problem. So can I get a motion on the May 14, 2020 minutes from the open meeting?
So moved.
Motion. Second.
Need a roll call.
Commissioner, this can be a voice vote.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, ayes have it. We have next is the WSP scorecard for the Metro Transit. Ray, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. So what I'd like to do is share my screen. I have a presentation, and so please let me know if you if this is when you can see a PowerPoint pop up on your screens. So give me half a second. Oh, apparently I can't share it. I don't know who's holding. It says I can't share my screen. So is that something you guys can let me do?
Try it again, Lorraine.
Okay.
Try it again, Lorraine.
Okay. Yep. Now we're in the right ballpark here.
Okay, I see it.
Okay. Thank you. So again, good morning. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but since you're not all together anyway, I guess that's just today's world. I want to give you an update on the status report for the security implementations. Again, because I have not been there in the over the last 3 months because of the pandemic, we did most of this assessment virtually, though the security team did provide evidence in a lot of the elements that we moved forward. So please just feel free to either stop me or we can take questions at the end. I'm okay with either one. So here is the scorecard for the current assessment of where the implementation of those activities are. I would draw your attention specifically to those hatched marks. That's the improvement that we have seen over the last three months. So in our minds, this is absolutely great progress in moving this program forward. There are two areas where progress is not being made, and we'll talk about those, but they are largely fair enforcement and technology. But let's talk further about that in a few minutes. Again, just to highlight the growth from September of 2019 to June 2020. So when we started and where we are today, you can see that the program has made significant growth in several areas. And we are very pleased to see how much the recommendations and the things that we all talked about being implemented have made it into the program. And I believe you were each provided a scorecard sheet that has more detail, a breakdown of the different elements. Is that correct, Myra or Herb? Did you guys get the handout?
I've got just a packet that what you're showing now on the screen. I've got a copy of that.
Okay, then there is a handout that you'll be given that has the breakdown. It's the full scorecard with each of the elements.
Yes, that will be forwarded today, commissioners. We just got it from, of course, our conduit is get it through Marcy Meistrick with East West Gateway. And I believe that was received yesterday. So I'm happy to get those details out as well. They'll follow up right after this meeting.
Thank you, Toby. So let me talk about the progress in each area. So this does give you a glimpse into those details. What we're finding is that the working relationships, the functional working relationships between the partners that had been so disrupted is becoming a very collaborative and positive working relationship. We're seeing that the roles between the different pieces of the security strategy players are being well defined and they're documented in the security plan. We know that the security plan from when I was there last was approved and implemented. It's been working its way through the program. There are a few things that that Kevin and Steve and the staff still are aspiring to put into place, but we knew that there would be pieces that needed some time to mature. I'm very happy about seeing that the safety and emergency management have moved under that same program in a single organizational unit that allows emergency management to respond no matter whether it's a safety event or a security event. It also provides for some realization of like activities. So when safety and security both work together, the system is just stronger across. I've been noting, and of course we have to, I want to put a big asterisk here. We're working in a COVID-centric time. What you're seeing out on your system and the way people are interacting with this system are not normal. Obviously, we're all in that situation. So this whole concept will be tested further once the COVID starts to release its grip on your system and other systems. So please note that we were not ignorant of that, and there are some places we could not score just because of the COVID situation. We have not seen the negative communication, and we have seen proactive communication and media strategies being developed. Again, at the moment we're very COVID specific, but we have not. We have seen that the concepts within the bi-state and metro have been proactive in their nature, not reactive. As you're in the midst of emergency management activity, we know that that program is becoming functional. It doesn't have full marks. We know that they're still filling out that department and integrating it, but they've had to respond very quickly to the current COVID. And we've thought that that was has been a positive response, even though everybody has criticisms about how that works. It is functional and it is trying to protect the people that need to be protected. And politics, we didn't put a special bullet up here regarding the politics. That's one of the places that because of COVID, we don't really have full visibility as to this security issues with the political situations because everybody is very focused on something else. So we didn't want to rate something that we really couldn't see any evidence of. So it's not a negative aspect. It's just we wanted to maintain until we could see in a more realistic situation how this is playing out. Any questions on the security strategy piece? Okay, I will move on. Police and security staffing. This has been a huge advancement. The leadership under Kevin and under Steve, the leadership under the task force, the police task force, and then the new G4 leadership, all of the leadership in the programs are aligned. They are working together. The staff positions within Metro have been reestablished and reallocated. They are becoming that supportive glue between law enforcement and G4S. There's still a little work to be done in that space, but it is on its way. That's mostly establishing appropriate oversight roles within that program. All program partners are supportive of the new direction, G4S, and we'll talk more about G4S in a few minutes, but they have embraced the new program. They are visible, they are around. Law enforcement is collaborative and working together. And then we have our TSS'S, the Metro staff, who are working in concert with those two programs. The security staff at each level has been provided proper tools. Again, it's hard. I don't want to ignore the fact that your ridership right now does not reflect your typical ridership. So we will continue to look at that to make sure that those tools are the proper tools, or the leadership group will continue to review those. But at this point, it looks like that transition to providing tools appropriate to their position is working. The deployment is collaborative. I'm going to show you a shot here in a minute of a joint or an integrated deployment schedule that they've rolled out. It's being used to emphasize the strength of each one of the partner groups. And it's very exciting to me to finally see an integrated deployment schedule that looks at coverage of the system. At each level of the security staffing, the oversight has been strengthened. There is a good solid base of oversight at the G4S level. They're taking that very seriously. Again, I'm hoping in 3 months to be able to visit you. At that point, I will try to have my eyes on that. But we dug into this with Kevin and Steve to ask for examples. And then we actually had an interview with the G4S team also to make sure that we felt comfortable with what we were saying around the oversight piece. The one piece, and Kevin, please weigh in, at the Metro security level, the TSS'S, they were still working through getting the right oversight and management out on the street. Is that true, Kevin? Have you finished those interviews, or is that still in process?
So where we are is we have all of the former PSO employees had to go through a vetting process. There are clear defined job descriptions now for each level. That was never the case before. Everything was merged together. So there's the TSS level employee, and then we have the TSS team leads. All the police rank type references have been removed. The leads are still being vetted. We have interim leads in place. We're in the midst of doing interviews now to reestablish that leadership core. And then we have a TSS field supervisor who would be equivalent to what you've known as a lieutenant, but would be an operational coordinator for the TSS. That has been put in place, and we chose an internal candidate for that. So with the leadership that we have with Billy and Steve from G4S, with Jerry on the TSS side, and in collaboration with Steve and his group, we feel like we have a very strong leadership core in place. And that really what's going to make the difference for us in the long run, especially on the MetroLink side, is the way that our G4S partners, who are the most visible component of security, are led on a daily basis. Those two gentlemen are highly professional. They're in the building every day, and they've acquiesced into the broader field security leadership team. So I'm very pleased with how that's going. There's still work to be done, don't get me wrong, but we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Kevin. The deployment of staff has embraced this active movement throughout the system, not in all spaces. One of the things, and we'll talk about it later, but Kevin and Steve, they're using the data to determine where a more constant presence is required, but they're also moving those security staff around the system to help them stay engaged, keep them active, keep them looking at both the trains and the platforms. Again, the real test of this will be as ridership comes back. Does this model provide that level of interaction and engagement that your ridership was looking to have? So we're actually looking at the COVID situation as a lead in to a full ridership exposure to this new deployment strategy. One of the other pieces and in the leadership team that you have before you couldn't be more emphatic about this issue is they have talked to their law enforcement partners, their G4S partners, and there's total agreement that if there are issues in this new deployment, in this new model, that those will be resolved outside of the public realm. They will talk them over, they will figure out a solution, and they will come united back to the table, and no more of the behind each other's backs sniping. So they're resolved to stay coordinated and collaborative, and to me that's a big step forward in that relationship, because nobody can believe that this is going to be absolutely smooth all the way through. There will be issues, there will be disagreements, but if this agreement holds to work through those collaboratively, that's a gigantic step forward. So I just wanted to give you a couple of clips of this integrated deployment schedule. You can see how each layer of security coverage is indicated. I've only showed a couple of the sheets here. They're all working in this zone type deployment model where the different people are assigned to these zones. As you can see, there still are some transit center postings. There are also some use of people that are specifically looking at some of the bus areas. So this integrated deployment schedule is a huge step forward, where previously there were 3 separate schedules that were not collaborative, not coordinated, and didn't necessarily cover all of the gaps in the system. And this is issued daily. So within this element, there's some work to be done, but they are moving forward. We've already heard some people responding back to the ride and abide policy. They have approved and posted the passenger code of conduct. There is standard operating procedures that are being developed, and Kevin has someone working very hard at getting SOPs developed for each type of activity that these groups will be engaged in. The previous standard operating procedure did not reflect the current deployment model or the current policing model on the system. And the piece that needs to catch up is the training that supports these new roles and responsibilities. So they have focused, Steve has been focusing on this training element and has a lot of the training done. G4S, of course, brought their own training program, but there have been some interruptions. For example, there was a TSI class, a Transit Safety Institute class. They do classes all over the US in safety and security in transit. there had been a class scheduled for St. Louis, and because of the COVID-19 situation was canceled. And that class, and with all their classes, their law enforcement partners are being invited to participate in that training. So some interruptions in some of the training that we wanted to have rolled out, that we were hoping to get rolled out, but the efforts will continue. I believe TSI will start having classes again, at least they're anticipating classes in the fall. So I'm sure Steve will be able to get that rescheduled and get that back on the slate. Holistically, they're looking at the entire training program to make sure the elements prepare each of the levels for what they're being asked to do, and test them to make sure that they're competent in doing that. So fair enforcement, and it came up in the comments of the gentleman, is one of the places that we feel needs the most focus, needs a lot of focus. There has been movement in the citation program, where there's some been movement to get a citation process that is agreed upon across the area that the citations would be given. They're still trying to do those final tweaks to get that in place. I think the cohesion of the FAIR program, the making sure all of the elements support and streamline a program that is fairly enforceable, that does not require additional steps to meet the program or to be compliant with the program, that's still being reviewed. And Kevin indicated to me that there is a group that's looking at all of these elements. You've changed some of your fair enforcement or your fair media pieces over the COVID situation. I think the touch potential, but looking at that holistically and making sure the FAIR program is equitable, making sure any elements that come out of the FAIR program as far as citations are also equitable and not targeting any one group is obviously a very critical point, not just at this juncture, but just because it's the right thing to be done.
I'm sorry, Lorraine,
yes.
before we move from that point, I think
Sure.
it's important that I don't want to lose my train of thought here. So I would ask that you answer this question, and then perhaps Kevin can address it locally. But do you feel like our ride and abide policy, our enhanced fair enforcement, and any issue in which there's a touch point with customers that might be sensitive, has been is adhering to best practices when it comes to racial equity? That's really key to me, and I would like to know what your thought is about that, whether we've looked at those things and compared ourselves to other metropolitan areas in this regard.
We did look at it originally, and it was actually one of the issues, Rose, that I brought up when several times I was passed over for being asked for my fare when others around me were not passed over. So that has been on my mind. That's so I think that's exactly what we've tried to address with some of the elements. So the training for the fair enforcement staff out of G4S is very specifically targeted to looking at equitable enforcement. The ride and abide policy as it's written is not, it was written with very clearly equality in mind about how it's applied. It absolutely needs oversight. It absolutely needs the people involved to be trained and to be thoughtful about applying that that policy, because you cannot be just keeping people off the system that need that system for their economic or their life work. They need to be able to have some kind of way of reestablishing that, even if they have acted poorly on the system and are rightly being challenged about using it. there's got to be some sort of process to allow them to fix that situation. And I believe the elements of the ride and abide provide for that. But as the commenter actually pointed out, that does require that the person who adjudicates those issues needs to be also trained in being fair and equitable in that assessment. So that fair approach and that equitable approach and that approach that's blind to race or economic situation is something that needs constant oversight and constant revisiting to make sure that you don't move off of that line of neutrality. I know one of the things that I've seen as a policy, and we've talked to the team about this, is revisiting the data and looking to make sure, evaluating the data to make sure it is not unfairly targeting any one type of group. So that takes good data first. It takes the ability to evaluate that data, which is growing within the team. But Rose, I agree, those are absolutely critical. I think your policies are in line, but as we all know, it comes down to how those are enforced. And that will take constant oversight and constant attention to make sure it stays equitable. And Kevin, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, as far as the fair enforcement and the rate of citations and how they're issued, there is a model that has been in existence for a number of years throughout a number of different states, the way citations are tracked by organizations in the broader states. We should put the same type of component here in place with the collection of data. Who are we issuing these citations to? At what rate? Are we seeing an imbalance in the issuance of citations to one group of individuals as opposed to the other? And we have a true analytical process in place now with Andrea and that team. And as we move forward with the enhancement of our fair enforcement policies and how we conduct ourselves on the system with enforcing those rules, on the backside, we should be countering that with tracking that data to see where we are in the issuance of these citations to be able to either support or refute any of these concerns. And so we're working to put that together, and we'll work more closely with Steve and Andrea on that. But the state of Missouri, I'm sure the state of Illinois has the same process in place when you talk about law enforcement issuing citations and how that's tracked. We need to put a similar in-house model in place here. This needs staunch oversight to ensure that we're balanced in how we and fair and how we enforce those violations. Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate that. I would also ask the staff to consider, and the other members of the security committee to consider whether or not that oversight becomes a key component of this group's charge. That we should be vociferous in making sure that we oversee that as a board. And this, to me, this committee, that would be one of their key functions.
I appreciate what Commissioner Windmiller has raised. I'd also like to hear Jessica's perspective on these issues, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. So one of the tasks that we worked with WSP on through phase 2 of this study was an equity analysis of our fare structure and fare system. Lorraine, has that been completed based on our current fare system and based on current policy and deployment? That's one question. That'll help me, Commissioner, answer your response.
I actually don't know the status of that. I believe it's completed, but I'd have to come back to you, Jessica.
Okay, thank you. So from my perspective, Commissioner, when we look at fare equity, we're looking at fair pricing, the availability of fare payment options, the utilization of our fare payment media amongst our customers, and we're working to create a new fare system. We've done this for existing fare systems, so we're working to create a new fare system that provides our customers with options that are meaningful, convenient, and relevant to them and their day-to-day life. But then it's public safety's tasking to ensure on the MetroLink side of our operation anyway, that there is compliance with this effort. I actually have a number of questions I was jotting down that the public safety and operations team can discuss in our weekly call later today about enforcement and data. But I know that we are at least developing a program that we never had before within public safety that is tracking our fare violations, that is tracking some of the data that we haven't had a good look on. So I think we have work to do. We have work to do as we redesign our fare collection system. We have work to do as we consider how we enforce fares and how we train our team members, and then ongoing work with the collection of information and the analysis of fare equity through particularly a racial equity lens. So I think we're on the path, Commissioner. We're not quite there yet, but well on the way.
Thank you.
So I would add one thought you might consider, Kevin, or whoever is going to make those decisions. Some agencies actually bring an outside agency in occasionally to audit that program. Someone with no stake in the game, and someone that can look through all the data and make sure, or at least provide feedback through that equity lens of what's happening within the system, who has been banned from the system, what were those issues, what was that policy, where are the citations. So you might think about some outside audit on some occasional basis that could review that data, because that would give you a very good confidence level into what you're having. And that's not to say your internal data would be flawed, but it's always good to have an outside eye, just to affirm what you think you are seeing out of your own system. Moving forward, I think some of the things, when we first came in, this whole study was driven by concerns about the fare program and people not paying, and negative activity that was happening around that program. I think there have been big changes to help provide clear direction for passengers about where the fare zones are, what those fare zone requirements are, by some of the infrastructure work that Jessica and her team has taken to define spaces and define where that TVM and that validator sit within the system to allow buying the fare before you enter the system. So those are big changes. The clearer you can be about expectation, the less riders can say that they were confused. And I will say, and you've heard me tell you that several times, I did not validate because that's just not a system that's familiar to me. But being clear and being concise about those requirements, whether that's the continuing look at the fare system or whether the fare system changes and requires, keep that conversation between your ridership and those expectations. I believe I was talking to Kevin about the ability to enforce fares and do fare type sweeps. And he talked about this redeployment strategy is allowing them to have additional attention to fare as needed. So if they are needed to do a fare sweep, if they're finding that fare compliance is not being, is falling, they have a staff between the law enforcement and G4S and the TSS'S to do additional fare sweeps. Again, make sure those are all done through that equity lens. It shouldn't be one neighborhood that's always hit. It should be something that is driven by data, driven by the information that is received. But we do see this fare and fare enforcement program as one of the places that we are hoping for future growth. And it's a hard conversation right now throughout the U.S. Agencies are having conversations around fare and fare enforcement. A lot are moving to totally touchless fares, again, to stop the spread of any pandemic. They're moving to other forms of fare where it's on your phone. It's not something you ever hand over. It's something that you do not exchange information between the two to validate a fare. So I think this is one space that across the US and within St. Louis, we will see change as you evaluate your program and define the next steps. CPTED, or Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, is a program that's moved forward at St. Louis. I'm very pleased. The team has allocated a staff person to be leading the way in this kind of effort across St. Louis. So one of the efforts is to define what we call design criteria that's specific to security in this case. And Jason is looking at developing that design criteria. What that helps do is sets up for any new program or new part of the system. If it's a station expansion, if you were to expand your lines, there is criteria that helps define what a safe space looks like. It provides a backbone for planning any of these new spaces so that you don't have some of the problems that you have in some of your current infrastructure. So it helps define sight lines and lighting levels and where the entrances and exits should be to allow for safe passage through the systems. I know right now there's an effort to go through and update and get rid of old signs and update and provide new wayfinding. All of those have security implications. If you know where you're going, if you're not confused about your space, everybody feels safer in that environment. So that's happening now. Jason is doing a CPTED evaluation of the entire system and hopes to have a report out in, I believe, early July. Is that right, Kevin? Am I pushing him further than he told me? I can't remember. If you're speaking,
I would have to,
Jason.
yeah, I
Okay.
would have to let Steve.
Oh, Steve, do you know? Steve, you're on mute, so don't talk without taking yourself off mute.
Yes, that data is correct.
Okay, so he'll be doing this evaluation of every one of your stations and large transit centers to identify those areas that might be able to be, or that should be targeted to be updated. And that includes this lighting and sight lines, this ability to see and be seen in those stations and locations. He's also participating when there are designs being vetted to provide input early in the process to ensure that the design that comes out of that meets the requirements. So you don't have a built environment that you're now complaining about. We're doing it before that built environment happens. Those are very critical steps in becoming proactive in your security program rather than reactive when it doesn't work. I would say he's doing this collaboratively with law enforcement. So if law enforcement has information or ideas around some of these spaces, that's being integrated into his evaluation. So there's still some work to be done. The design criteria is not yet established. That's probably one of the biggest pieces. Other pieces around this really have to do with having the funds to make some of these changes in these locations. And that's obviously anything that costs a lot of money is something that you have to consider within the entire program. So he'll make note of those. He'll define what might need to be done, but then that would have to go through the budget process to make sure it fits within the bigger metro program.
One comment, Ms.
Yes.
Stewart. I do want to add, commissioners, there are a number of capital investments to Metrolink stations that have been included in the FY21 through 23 capital budget, which you approved earlier this year.
Thank you, Jessica. Technology, another space that one is very expensive to update technology, and two, there are some still some roadblocks that we need to get past. So one of them that has clearly been done, the access to the CCTV is being provided across all of the layers. The law enforcement can get any of the video that they need to see what's happening. We know the camera system is very outdated. It was developed for an entirely different purpose and it's being used today. But there is a grant application that's been submitted to DHS to support this additional camera and technology. It's a perfect match for that grant. This is one of the things that DHS, or the Department of Homeland Security, who provides those grants, this is one of the types of programs they fund. So there should be some good hope that they will fund this upgrade as well. With that, you will have better visibility of your system, and that means if a passenger is in trouble, if they're having an issue, there should be the capability to see what's happening and respond even more quickly, and actually respond in a safer way for those responding, because they can see what's happening. They're not walking into a situation where they can't see what's happening around that space.
Can our three police agencies communicate with each other, like on a shared frequency?
Not yet. That's the outstanding one. So if you'll hold that, Terry, Commissioner Beach, for a minute, I do want to talk about that.
Okay.
There have been growth areas within that, but there is still some major work to be done on that space. They are, and Kevin, do you want to speak, or Toby, do you want to speak to the progress that has been made? Let's just answer it now, or not. Kevin or Toby? You're both looking a little blank, so I'm.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. So where we currently are is our St. Clair County deputies still operate on our bi-state Metro main frequency within the MetroLink detail. That was not true for St. Louis County or St. Louis City. So at this juncture, the St. Clair County deputies are still operating daily on our frequency and communicate directly with our dispatchers. We did establish and signed an agreement with St. Louis County and St. Louis City to allow the bi-state dispatchers the ability to, in certain circumstances, use a dispatch to dispatch type talk group to communicate directly with St. Louis County or St. Louis City dispatchers. As you know, we operate in a very fluid environment. Things that we deal with are moving. And so the dissemination of information is hugely important in a timely fashion. So that's where we are at this juncture.
So I would characterize that as, so there's some improvement, but have we reached what the goal would be, which would be an integrated, perhaps PSAP of some type between all three agencies? No, we do not. We are not at that level, and nor do I or we have the authority to force that issue yet. So we're doing our best to cajole and convince. I think part of this also, if I can just be very frank, moving ahead and having good scorecards. And for instance, in the prior slides, when you show that we now have active and regular relationships, means that perhaps we are getting to a point where the trust issue is there to have the collaboration that's necessary. And I think you got to go through steps 1, 2, and 3 before you get to 4 and 5. And my point would be is I think that our partners wanted to see some proof that we were committed to a full renovation of our program. I think we're providing that right now, and I'm hopeful that maybe with some of that proof, we'll have a little bit more leverage to move the next step associated with communications.
And Toby, just to piggyback on that, as you and I have had this conversation for some time now, and I think now more so than ever, our partners need to realize with what we are going through in our society, communications between those first responders, our law enforcement people, our transit officers, whoever it is of the utmost importance. So I, for one, on this committee, I want to see that move. I'm kind of aggravated that, I keep hearing it's the partners are doing this. And, I think you've came to the table more than once to try to get this done. But when we have officers on our entire line that cannot communicate with one another, that is as we've talked before, that is a disaster waiting to happen, especially since everybody knows that is a major problem. So I would just ask that we light that fire a little bit higher and try to get this done.
Yep, I can't agree more, but the facts are the facts, and we have failed to reach the goal level. There's no question about that, and I might need help. For instance, this is the exact kind of circumstance from the Board of Commissioners where perhaps some of the political help and cajoling I could use, but we have not left that goal, and we're going to continue. But we have not reached it. That's true.
And Lorraine, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't that the communications was one of the major points when we first did the survey, the lack of being able to have that communications? Wasn't that one of the major?
It was, but it was split her between the technology and then obviously just the willingness to communicate. So I'm seeing a willingness to communicate that has changed, especially on the staff level. But the technology, the radio channel is still the issue. It's the reason this technology, or a huge reason, this one hasn't moved since we started. There's been go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that's my issue. The channel has been there since the inception of the radio system. And again, I understand what Mr. Roach is saying. It sounds like a political issue, but I don't want the commissioners to think that we have to go out and invent this new radio system, because we don't. That system has been there since day one, that everybody has data capability, but because certain partners didn't want to listen to the fare inspectors on the same channel. And Kevin and I have had this conversation before. And I know we got a meeting coming up later on this month about this, but it's not that we have to go out and reinvent the wheel here. It's just that Tawby needs some help in getting this important issue put to bed real quick for the safety of our officers.
Thank you, Commissioner Simmons. I think one of this supports what Tawby was just saying. I think some of the background to push this issue has been completed by Kevin and Steve and the team, and they have developed some procedures where some of the previous complaints of having the G4S or the contracted security on that channel, they've clearly defined how that would work going forward. They have talked about getting the people who would be on a shared police channel all on the same page as far as how to use that. There's a couple of issues, and there is a slide on focus areas that we need to be paying attention to. But I think, one of the pieces that was still at disagreement was the certification or the qualification of the dispatcher was an issue between some of the partners. So there's a few nuances. I do believe the improved relationship, plus you've had some change in staff in some of those partner areas. I think it's a good time to now push on this issue again, because it is one of the pieces that has not moved. The needle has not moved where we want it to go. So, and at this point, and with what's happening, your point is well taken. Our law enforcement partners are already acting in a at-risk kind of conditions. We need to make sure they're supported with their communications capabilities.
Thank you.
So let me move on with a few other things where they have made good progress. Your G4S folks and your TSS folks are highly visible on the system. That happened without a lot of fanfare because of the COVID situation. But Kevin did relate to me that he has had several people come up and talk to him about how many more security staff are on the system when in fact the numbers have not increased. They're just that much more visible to people who are riding. So I think those changes will impact even as you come back to a more standard ridership, that I'm hoping we'll see some more acknowledgement of these changes. So we've pretty much touched on this, but I do want to just walk through these again. There are some elements of progress that are dependent on funding. So updating the camera systems, applying CCTV to existing locations, and lighting and communications. Those are all dependent on funding. And I don't want to take away from what Jessica said, that there are capital projects in the budget, but the constraints are actually the flow of funds and making sure that holistically you are putting money towards the right things at the right time. So those are things that are being focused on, but the time and the funds at the moment are still being processed. One element that is dependent on political agreement, and that is the single radio channel. I do agree with Talby. I think the background information of trust has changed dramatically. I think it's time to push on this again and really try to reach agreement to move in this space. I think what Kevin is doing with the SOPs and Steve is doing with the training to make sure it's appropriately used if it's put into place provides some of that background against the previous complaints. But it's now time to fish or cut bait, because this is an issue that needs to be resolved. Another outstanding area of progress, and that's this cohesive fare enforcement program supported by streamlined fare instruments and technology. I know this is a focus of Metro and Metrolink, the teams. So getting those that program consolidated and streamlined with good data, following up on that data, making sure that it is equitable, that the ridership sees that being applied fairly, is a critical piece needing progress. The training program is lagging a little bit, but that's to be expected because you want the policies and the programs in place, or at least outlined, to understand what you need to train to. Steve is working with his team to catch up on that training program, to have the staff and the training to be provided to all of these layers of the security program to make sure it's correct. And then the last piece that has definitely had a huge leap since Steve brought in Andrea, this building the program off of solid data, whether that's the equitable application of the fare enforcement program, whether that's the effectiveness of your deployment, whether that's understanding how many people pay fares, it's all should be based on good data. And I know Andrea is working very hard to bring that around. Again, I do want to highlight to you the current struggle with the law enforcement agencies moving between UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting System, and NIBRS. This is the year of conflict because they will be moving to this new data system at different times. So beware of that as you're seeing data come out of those systems. Andrea is trying to find a way to bring that data together, but this is the year where they move to that new data system at different times. So data is going to look a little messy right now around arrests or around enforcement activities because of that. So I want you to stay aware and know that in the future that'll be much simpler because they will be reporting data in a consistent basis. But I can't emphasize enough that the activities should be supported by a solid data program. So I would ask that you hold the team accountable to that data, ask to see the data, and question the data if it doesn't look appropriate. And the data should be also looking at that equity issue about how the security applications are applied to make sure that it is not over reflecting a community that is underrepresented or vice versa. With that, my last slide, just happy to see a lot of the team working together. Obviously, these are all not active photos because I'm not there. I had to gather photos from those, but there is collaboration happening. Kevin and Steve and the team have made a huge difference in this program, and I'm pleased with the progress to date. For a while, it really felt like we were spinning some wheels and not making any progress, but I see a huge leap in things as some of these pieces have coalesced. So with that, any other questions or comments, I'd be glad to answer if I can.
Thank you, Lorraine. Is there any questions from the commissioners for Lorraine? This was for informational only, and we appreciate you taking the time to give us that important update. If I not hearing any questions, I'll move on to the update for information only, a response and coordination to the protest. Kevin and Stephen, who's going to take that, or both of you?
Go ahead, Steve. You go first, and then I'll go second.
So the coordination for the current scheduled rallies, scheduled and unscheduled, we are in tandem with the local TSA office, FBI, and the St. Louis Fusion Center, along with emergency operations centers and our partners along the alignment. We also have our own intelligence group working around the clock to collect the information in regards to intelligence on those rallies. To date, we've had just over 28 rallies scheduled, different types of events. And they have been ranging, obviously, from early last week, around June 3rd, plus all the way through current schedule. In fact, the schedule is continuing to grow, but to date, we're approximately at 28 events that have occurred. Along that point, and as far as how we responded, I did receive a report from operations to ensure that we have not been receiving any major or critical events that were greatly reducing our ability to move our clients in a proper fashion. Speaking to the general manager of bus, we've been very fortunate. We've had very minor delays, mostly serving whether in North County or downtown St. Louis near the Civic Center. However, the proactiveness between communications department, the EOC, the operations folks have been able to stay in front of each of these events to ensure that our passengers are not stranded and that they continue to move. So we've received very minor delays. As part of this, we also deployed our UAS, which is our unmanned drone. We did gain clearance to the FAA and the low altitude authorization notification capabilities. While the drone is typically used for inspections and mapping and accident reconstruction, we did make the decision to go ahead and deploy the drone to ensure that everyone is staying safe and that we could also forecast what the demonstrations were doing in the Brentwood area, the metro, downtown St. Louis. We were able to have a mobile feed provided to us to understand if there's anything that maybe we were not seeing that the intelligence was seeing. And quite frankly, it went very well. On a high note, we did have some officers come up to the drone pilot to inquire about his license. and to whether he had proper clearance to be using the drone. And the reason why I bring that up is because according to the TSA and intelligence that they're using, one of our major threats right now, nationally that is the illegal use of UAS and the drones being used for other purposes. So fortunately, it was both a win-win. Not only were we cleared to do what we're doing, but our local law enforcement was paying attention close enough to make sure that we were doing it appropriately. So we follow reports very closely with the Transportation Security Agency, and they follow a very close network of peaceful and sometimes unfortunately violent protests with those that are involved with domestic extremist activities. Some of the events that they did mention leveled out of North Carolina, Oakland, California. However, they did mention one event out of St. Louis, which was the event where the packaging truck was being looted while on the surface streets. And unfortunately, when the vehicle was being moved due to the flourishing of handguns and whatnot, an individual was caught underneath the dual wheels. So that was mentioned. There have been several attempts on cyber attacks. However, they have not necessarily made it down to our region, down to the bi-state metro level to where we have had any concern. But we continue to collect intelligence, gathering information, and whether it is propaganda or being used for the right purposes, because as we all know, propaganda can also be very damaging when you're dealing with, for the most part, let's say more recently, the peaceful protests along those lines. So TSA, just as a matter of point, the TSA has also experienced unfortunate effects from not only from the COVID, but from all the demonstrations as well. They did share something that they normally don't on a consistent basis, which is they too are not immune to the activities that have been going on. We do participate closely, not only with the TSA and FBI in the fusion, but also with APTA. APTA provides a very good framework for us to make sure we can collaborate with our other brother and sister properties across the nation to ensure that we are not only current and up to date in our practices, but that we are doing a very good job. Consistently on a Friday, we talk to our TSA partners, and they have given us a very good round of applause typically on those Fridays in regards to how proactive we have been, not only with COVID, but with also with the scheduled events that have been occurring in our area. We do continue to grow on our statistical analysis that may coincide not only with the recent events, but overall, which I will share a little bit more intensely through, I'll share with Myra and Talby and then through you. We do follow reports by incident and by category. And when we're talking about what we are working together on from Metro Safety, Security, Emergency Management, our intelligence is growing by the week. The difficult part is that we were well on our way producing very deep intel up to the point that the COVID and the rallies and then unfortunately with the switch from into the NIBR system coming at different times from the UCR, it slowed us down a little bit, but it's not going to slow us down for very long. We're going to be able to provide to you exactly how our deployment practices and our policies match up with how we're collecting that data. So to answer one of the questions on equity and concerns around that, we want to be able to provide those numbers to you to where they do make sense and to where we have a better understanding that we're applying what St. Louis needs the most, which is something that is uniformed and makes sense for the folks that are in this region. From that perspective, as we grow from not only the response from COVID and the recent response to the downtown activities, the reason why CPTED is so very important is that we find at times our own minor flaws during large scale events. Large scales events help you flush out little bits and pieces of areas that you may be very strong in or you may be a little bit weak in. Because of the septet events, we've been able to identify cameras that are blocked by trees. We've been identifying areas that look uninhabited. We've been finding areas that we need better wayfinding. So we actually use this as a springboard to improve ourselves, just as we've rewritten the entire COOP for pandemic response during this whole event. So we've taken that advantage of that process. And then lastly, as we work very closely with the St. Louis region and their Fusion Center, we have been following many types of intel outlets that do also not only help us with make sure that our operational alignments are in congruence with our needs and our ridership levels, but also from the aspect that we could become victims to cyber attacks and personal information vulnerabilities. But again, the reason why these are being mentioned at this point is that it's very important to understand that during a heightened of awareness and outfits to where we're doing higher deployments, it's important to understand that's when you are your most vulnerable and you don't want to have those vulnerabilities occur. So we've been very good here at Metro over the last 10 weeks in regards to responding positively and proactively, but also we found that our services, as much as they were almost maintained to their maximum capabilities during the rallies and protests, we've done a very good job. I'd like to mention a shout out to MetroLink, who virtually didn't have to change any of their operational capabilities. And then another one to the Metro Bus with very, very minor delays. In fact, when I asked for in-depth detail, it was nice to receive back about 4 sentences to say that the vast majority of our service were intact during the whole event. And Kevin, turn it over to you.
So beginning on June 2nd, with the original downtown demonstration, we put some other measures in place in conjunction with Steve and the information that we had discussed. We bolstered our evening crews with additional transit security personnel. We assumed in-house real-time viewing of our CCTV feed, which is hugely important, a hugely important discussion going forward. We also established real-time viewing of social media feeds as well here in our building, as well as repositioning staff to monitor certain facilities in the impacted areas in the city's core, certain metro facilities. Additional TS staffing was used to float trains and transit centers in impacted areas. We made modifications to the G4S schedule in conjunction with their leadership to reposition some of their personnel. This was done to complement the efforts as we continue to use the St. Louis City Sheriff's deputies as a secondary deployment. They complemented what we were trying to do or the adjustments that we made here in the city's core with readjusting our own security personnel. So when we had to move certain elements of G4S, we compensated that with the use of the Sheriff's Department. These changes really still stay in place. We made these changes on June 2nd, but a lot of these redeployment efforts still remain in place as we continue to traverse this issue. We monitored on 6/6, we monitored 6 different protests very closely. On 6/7, we monitored an additional 3. And on 6/8, we monitored also 3 protests. In addition to the MetroLink Police Task Force efforts, our leadership team has been in close collaboration with municipal partners, which I'd like to expound on just a little bit and why that's so important. But we've worked closely over the last couple of weeks with the city of Brentwood, the city of Richmond Heights, and the city of Normandy. One of the things that will complement our broader security structure going forward is revamping, rebuilding, and collaborating more staunch relationships with our municipal partners throughout the region, because our facilities and our alignment are embedded in these different cities under these different services. So that is a priority going forward, to bring a lot of these municipalities, both on the Missouri side and on the Illinois side, into an understanding of our services, our vehicles, and how they can help support us after hours in patrolling some of our platforms and our properties. So those are some things that we did over the last couple of weeks in response on the field side to the protesting.
Very good. Thanks for the report, guys. That was for information only. Is there any questions for Kevin or Steve? We appreciate the job you're doing out there. I know through these trying times. So we appreciate that. Let's move on to item 7, update on the May 29th Belleville Station incident.
So that, of course, was a law enforcement investigation. I have walked through everything with Lieutenant Peters, who's the St. Clair County Sheriff's Deputy Department MetroLink commander over there. This was an apparent overdose at the Belleville station, the MetroLink station, on May 29th. The subject was found unresponsive by a fellow passenger around 5:45 a.m. The victim possessed 6 fully charged syringes loaded with a narcotic, and he passed away with one of the syringes in his arm. It was explained to me by the task force that he possibly purchased said narcotics somewhere in the broader area and then came to the platform. We have him, as we went back and reviewed the tape, we have him coming onto property around 12:15 a.m. and kind of disappearing off of camera view. And again, he was located by a passenger at 5:45 a.m. They summoned the sheriff's department. They got there around 5:50 a.m. and tried to apply Narcan, which had no effect, obviously, on the victim. So that's where we stand at this juncture.
Okay, any questions for Kevin on that incident? Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate that. Okay, item 8 on the agenda. The only executive session item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes of the May 14th Security Subcommittee executive session meeting. If there's no discussion regarding this item, we can forego today's executive session and move forward with taking a motion on a roll call vote to approve them. If the board agrees, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the May 14th, 2020 Security Subcommittee executive meeting as a closed record?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Wynn-Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Brown,
Yes.
Commissioner Simmons,
Yes.
Commissioner Galladay,
Yes.
Commissioner Beach,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Costello.
Aye.
Motion passed.
Very good. Madam Chairman, do you have anything for the committee?
I do not.
Okay, Mr. Roach?
Yes, Kit, if Commissioner, if you would, I'd like to comment just on a couple of quick issues.
Please, thank you.
All right, very good. Some of this is just to also respond to the public comment issues. So there are, I will note that in the upcoming June meeting, there will be 2 critical issues to come before the Board of Commissioners. One, of course, is the ride and abide. I encourage everyone to look at that document thoroughly. There is embedded within that document some of the very important provisions for review and for a normal adjudication processes. The equity issues are only going to be as good, not only as we put it within writing, but also as we oversee it. And I mean the collective we, and I look forward to that. And I think it's a well thought out document, but always important tuning with what's going on and what the data is telling us. So that will come in June. In addition, I asked several weeks ago for Jessica Metfer-Miller and Ted Zimmerman to pursue a mobile ticketing option. They are moving forward with that at a light speed basis. I want to commend them for moving so quickly. And that's an effort to limit the exposure, really that touch aspect associated with ticketing. And that will be moving forward, and we'll be able to give you an update about that in June as well. Also, I want to thank, of course, Lorraine and her team. I want to note that Lorraine is on West Coast time, so she woke up very early to give this report, and I appreciate that. But of course, these critiques are part of what is going to make us better. We've had some biting critiques at times, and I want to say that actually I really appreciate those because those help us look at what we're doing and do a better job. I also want to note just in the COVID response, so I will say when we are, or I should say the protest response, there's a lot of communications that happen on text every single night. Jessica and her operations team in conjunction with Steve and the safety and security team communicating via text every single night. Really the past 6 days, it's been every single night until really 10:30 at night. The effort being to stay out of the way and stay peaceful, protect our assets and allow the peaceful process to move on appropriately within our community. I want to commend the team, and I think that they've accomplished that. I really want to bring that just to the Board of Commissioners' attention. I feel very good about this progress. This is one of those report cards you want to bring home, obviously, but there's some things that still need some work. And I think this is always going to be a process that we're working through diligently. Just as our community changes, I think our security should be changing and adjusting, and I'm looking forward to continuing this progress. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Anybody have any comments or questions for Mr. Roach while we have him here? Okay, good. I want to take a minute and welcome our newest commissioner to the board, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate you and looking forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson, I'm sorry. As chair, I probably should have done that first, but I was going to wait until our board meeting, but I did want to welcome you and let you know how happy we are that you're able to join us for the security subcommittee. Thanks so much. And I actually had one comment to address some of the things that Talby mentioned. I was involved in the Ride and Abide policy development through the Transit Advisory Working Group. I know how hard the group worked on the policy. It also included a very diverse group of people coming together to discuss and eventually create the policy, including the Organization for Black Struggle, the SEIU, several civic organizations, folks from the chamber. It had widespread support. So I was one of the people that was supportive of it. My issue is not with the development of the policy, which I think is good. I think what we have to really double down on is making sure that as it's implemented and as the training around the implementation of the policy occurs with our staff, that we make sure we view everything through a racial equity lens and make sure that we constantly are looking at that policy and we're constantly developing the data that we need to make sure that not only that it's implemented appropriately and the training is appropriate, but the board really understands how it's going to affect the system and in particular our customers.
I agree. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, if nobody objects, I would ask Mr. Johnson to make a motion to adjourn. Let him get his feet wet.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
We have a motion. You have a second?
Second.
And all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Have it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the week and a good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.